The restaurant buzzed with a low hum of clinking glasses and muted conversations. It was just another Friday night at Maddox's, an upscale bistro tucked in a quiet corner of the city. But for Mia Collins, it was another night of walking the tightrope between her identity and the expectations of a world that wasn't quite ready for her. She moved between tables, serving plates with practiced grace, the soft sway of her uniform dancing with every step. Then it happened. A customer at table 3, a middle-aged man with a pinstriped suit and a face that screamed authority, raised his glass, eyeing her with a smirk. "You don't belong here," he muttered, low enough so only she could hear. Her breath caught in her throat. A line like this, sharp and casual, as if it were just another observation. But it was a knife. She paused, her hand trembling slightly as she set down the wine bottle. Her thoughts raced. Did he really just say that? In 2026. The laughter of the table masked the sting, and Mia turned away, her heart pounding in her chest. But then she heard it. "Did you hear me?" His voice, colder now, sliced through the air. "You don't belong here." Her gaze hardened, her back straightening as the sting of his words took root. She refused to let him see how deeply they cut. But somewhere in her, a fire began to spark. She wasn't going to let this slide. Not this time. Not anymore. The man leaned back in his chair, eyes gleaming with cruel satisfaction. Mia's fingers gripped the tray tighter. Something inside her shifted, the air thick with tension as she took a step forward, ready to face the wrong that had just been spoken. Mia Collins' hands shook ever so slightly as she carefully placed a glass of wine in front of a customer. The restaurant was buzzing with chatter, the clinking of silverware, and the soft hum of a jazz tune filtering through the speakers. It was another typical Friday night at Maddox's, a place known for its fine dining and impeccable service. But tonight something felt different. Mia had worked at the bistro for over 2 years. She had learned the rhythms of the kitchen, the preferences of the regulars, and the importance of smiling through the pain. Being a black woman in a predominantly white space meant keeping her head low, staying polite, and never ever rocking the boat. But it was becoming harder and harder to ignore the subtle microaggressions, the casual racism that seemed to weave into the fabric of every shift. She glanced across the room, her eyes landing on table 3, a businessman with sharp features and a pinstriped suit, surrounded by a group of his colleagues. His eyes were narrowed in a way that made Mia uneasy, but she continued her rounds. As she approached, the man's gaze sharpened. He straightened up in his seat, adjusting his tie. The other patrons at the table went silent for a moment, as if waiting for something. Mia placed the wine down on the table with a practiced smile. "Here you go, sir," she said, her voice steady but soft, the familiar words leaving her lips without much thought. The man took a long look at her, his gaze lingering. Then, with the faintest smirk, he lowered his voice just enough for her to hear. "You don't belong here." The words hit her like a slap. For a moment, everything around her seemed to freeze. His words hanging in the air like smoke. Her mind raced, 1,000 thoughts flashing through her, none of them coherent. Did he really say that? Was this some sort of joke? Was he just testing her? Mia forced herself to breathe. She felt the heat rise in her chest, the flush creeping up her neck. It wasn't the first time she'd heard something like that, those coded words, that condescending tone, but it was different this time. His voice wasn't loud enough for anyone else to hear, but it was there. It was a judgment, challenge. She stood there for a beat too long, her hand hovering just above the table, her body frozen in place. The laughter from the other side of the restaurant seemed distant now, muffled by the pounding of her heart. He repeated it, louder this time, his words oozing with a cold satisfaction. "You don't belong here," he said again, eyes gleaming as he leaned back in his chair, clearly enjoying the power he held in this moment. Mia blinked, feeling the sting of his words settle deep within her chest. She wanted to scream at him. She wanted to demand an apology, to make him feel the weight of his cruelty. But instead she clenched her jaw, forced herself to take a step back and moved toward the kitchen, her fingers gripping the tray just a little too tightly. She wasn't surprised. She knew how it worked. She had learned long ago to hide her anger behind a mask of professionalism. But tonight something felt different. In the kitchen, Mia's co-worker Clara, who was prepping for the next round of orders, glanced up at her. There was something in her eyes. Sympathy, understanding. Clara had seen it before. She had been there herself. "You okay?" Clara asked, her voice soft but knowing. Mia didn't answer right away. Instead, she stood there, staring at the stainless steel countertops, trying to calm the storm swirling inside her. It wasn't the first time someone had tried to make her feel small, to remind her that, despite her hard work and qualifications, she was still other. But the words had never cut this deep. "I don't know," Mia said, her voice low, almost trembling. "He said I don't belong here." Clara's face tightened with frustration. "It's bullshit, Mia. You know that." Mia nodded but didn't say anything. The silence between them stretched on, heavy with the unspoken truth. Clara had been on the receiving end of similar treatment before, but Mia hadn't fully understood the depth of it until now. It wasn't just the occasional microaggression or the side-eyed glances. This was a direct, ugly attack, a reminder of her place in a world that constantly made her feel invisible unless it wanted to use her. But Mia wasn't about to let him win. Not this time. She wiped her hands on her apron and glanced at the clock. It was just past 7. The dinner rush was in full swing. But her mind was elsewhere, turning the man's words over and over. The sting of them, the way they made her feel. Small, insignificant, like a ghost in the room. As she returned to the dining area to collect empty plates, her eyes kept drifting back to table 3. The man was laughing again, speaking in low tones to his companions. But Mia couldn't shake the feeling that his words were still echoing in the air, hanging over her like a cloud. She clenched her fists, resolved not to let it go. Not this time. She wasn't invisible. Not to him. Not to anyone. And she wasn't going to let that moment define her. Mia woke up to a feeling that was hard to shake, a mixture of frustration and uncertainty that clung to her like the heavy, humid air of a summer day. She had barely slept, replaying the moment at table 3 over and over in her mind. The man's words were still there, like a dull ache in her chest. He had been so casual, so dismissive. It made her feel small, insignificant, like she was nothing more than the invisible worker who existed only to serve. But it wasn't just the insult that gnawed at her. It was the system. Mia had spent years watching how the powerful walked through Maddox's, the ones who owned the place, the regulars who tipped generously but expected the world in return. She had learned early on that a black woman in a predominantly white space had to walk carefully, had to always be polite, always be professional. She had to make sure that she was invisible, yet indispensable. And even then, it wasn't enough. She had kept her mouth shut about the microaggressions, the jokes, the stares. What good would it do to say anything? In her experience, speaking up only made things worse. She had seen it before. The customers who didn't like the way a waitress looked at them, the ones who treated her like a servant and not a person. She had heard the quiet mutterings behind her back, the whispered comments from other staff about how, it's just the way things are. But after what happened last night, Mia couldn't stay silent anymore. She needed to do something. The moment the clock struck 3, signaling the start of her shift, Mia walked into the restaurant, her stomach a tight knot. She had made the decision. She would report the incident. Maybe not just to her manager, but to the owner of the restaurant. It was time for them to see what had been happening beneath the polished surface of their fine dining establishment. As she walked into the back kitchen, she found Clara bent over the counter, meticulously chopping vegetables. Her face lit up when she saw Mia, but the smile quickly faded when she saw the look in her friend's eyes. "Are you okay?" Clara asked, her voice softer than usual. Mia nodded, though her eyes betrayed her. "I'm going to report it," she said firmly. "To Barry." Barry was the manager. He had been working at Maddox's for years, and though he wasn't a bad person, Mia had always gotten the sense that he valued his job more than anything else. She had seen him bend over backward to keep the regulars happy, smoothing things over with a forced smile whenever someone complained. But what happened to her? What would happen if she spoke up? "Are you sure that's a good idea?" Clara asked, her knife pausing mid-slice. "I mean, Barry's a good guy, but you know how he is with the customers. He'll probably just brush it off." "I don't care," Mia said, her voice rising slightly. "I'm not letting this go. I can't." Clara bit her lip, her eyes flicking nervously to the side. "I get it, Mia. But you've seen how things work around here. If you speak up, things might get messy. I mean, they'll back him up, not you. That's just how it is." Mia felt her chest tighten. She had known this would be Clara's response. It was the same feeling Mia had carried for years, the quiet knowledge that any form of resistance could lead to consequences she wasn't prepared for. But Mia was prepared now. She had no other choice. "Then let them back him up," Mia said, her voice quieter now but resolute. "I'm not going to keep pretending like this is okay. It's not just me. I've seen it happen to other people. Other servers, other staff. No one ever says anything. No one ever does anything. I'm not going to let that happen anymore." Clara stood silently for a moment, her eyes searching Mia's face. Then finally she nodded. "I understand. You're right. I don't want you to get hurt, you know." "I know," Mia said softly, a small smile crossing her face. "But I have to do this." With that, Mia turned and walked toward the office, her footsteps heavier than usual. She could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on her as she pushed open the door to Barry's office. He was sitting behind the desk, tapping away on his phone, a frown on his face. "Mia." Barry greeted her with a half-smile. "How's everything going? What's up?" Mia took a deep breath, gathering her thoughts. "I need to talk to you about something. It's important." Barry looked up at her, his expression softening. "Of course. What's going on?" Mia stood there for a moment, debating how to start. Should she just say it outright? Or should she ease into it? The thought of being dismissed made her heart race, but she pushed it aside. She wouldn't let him dismiss her this time. "Last night," Mia began, her voice shaking just slightly, "one of the customers made a comment. He told me that I didn't belong here." Barry's eyes narrowed in confusion. "What? Who?" Mia could feel her pulse quicken. She had thought about this moment 1,000 times, but now that it was happening, she could feel the walls closing in. "I don't know his name," Mia said, her eyes steady on Barry's, "but it was the man at table 3. He said I didn't belong here. And when I tried to walk away, he said it again." Barry stared at her for a long moment, his fingers tapping nervously against the edge of his desk. Then he sighed. "Mia, I don't know what to tell you. You know how things are around here. He's a regular. People come here for the atmosphere, for the service. We can't afford to lose customers like that." Mia's heart sank, but she didn't back down. "So, you're saying his words don't matter because he's a regular?" Barry shifted in his chair, visibly uncomfortable. "I'm not saying that, Mia. I'm just saying, maybe you're overreacting. It's not that big of a deal. Just let it go. It'll blow over." The words stung more than she thought they would. "Let it go," Mia repeated, her voice quiet but filled with disbelief. "You're asking me to let it go? Just like that?" Barry didn't meet her eyes. "Mia, this isn't the place to make waves. Just forget about it, okay?" She couldn't believe what she was hearing. The system, the very system that had made her feel invisible all these years, was now working against her. Mia's fists clenched at her sides, but she swallowed her frustration. She knew it was coming. She had known the system would protect the rich, the powerful, the ones who walked into Maddox's like they owned the place. But Mia wasn't going to let it slide. Not this time. Not anymore. "I won't forget it," she said, her voice firm as she turned to walk out the door. The following days dragged on like a heavy weight, each shift blending into the next, but the sting of the incident at table 3 lingered in the back of Mia's mind. Barry's dismissal still echoed in her head. He hadn't even tried to understand. It was as if her pain was invisible, not worth addressing. It was a reminder of how the system worked, how it silenced people like her. At work, Mia tried to keep her focus on the tasks at hand. She moved through the restaurant, delivering plates, refilling glasses, and smiling at the customers, always maintaining the air of professionalism she'd perfected over the years. But the underlying tension was palpable, thickening the air with each passing hour. She could feel the subtle shifts in how the staff interacted with her, avoiding eye contact, giving her just a little more space, their conversations trailing off when she entered the room. She hated how familiar it all felt. Polite distance, the unspoken avoidance, the way her presence felt like an inconvenience, even though she was the one doing the hard work. It was all part of the same pattern. People knew the rules of the game, even if they didn't speak them aloud. It wasn't until the third day after the incident that Mia found a moment of clarity. She was taking a short break in the employee lounge, sitting by the window, staring out at the city's skyline as it blurred into the night. The flickering streetlights below reminded her of the quiet city she felt so disconnected from, people living their lives, unaware of the small battles being fought in the shadows. Clara slid into the seat next to her, exhaling dramatically as she leaned back. "You all right?" Mia turned to her friend, her eyes tired but determined. "Yeah," she said, but the word felt like a lie. I don't know anymore, Clara." Clara raised an eyebrow. "I know you're mad. But you're also right. This place is toxic. Everyone's trying to pretend like it's not happening, but you and I both know it is." Mia sighed, dropping her gaze to the table. "I don't know what to do. He's just trying to keep things running smoothly. He doesn't care about what's really happening here. He just wants the regulars to be happy." Clara nodded, her lips tightening into a thin line. "I know. It's the same thing every time. But Mia, you've got to know that it's not just you. This stuff is happening to all of us. It's just easier to ignore it when it's not happening to you." Mia's head snapped up. "What do you mean?" Clara hesitated, her eyes darting around the room. The quiet of the employee lounge felt like a sanctuary, a place where the world outside couldn't touch them. "You're not the only one dealing with this. I mean, I've been here longer than you, and I've seen it all. Comments, the looks, the things that customers think they can say to us because we're just staff. I've had a customer call me sweetheart while I'm serving them, as if I'm some kind of child. I've had a guy pinch my arm when I gave him his drink. You know what I mean." Mia's stomach tightened. She had heard bits and pieces of similar experiences from Clara, but she hadn't realized just how deep the issues ran. She thought it was just her being overly sensitive, just her imagining things. But Clara's words were a wake-up call. This wasn't just about one man or one moment. This was a pattern, culture, one that Maddox's had bred, one that everyone had either accepted or ignored. Mia leaned forward, her voice low. "But what do we do about it? Barry won't even listen to me. He's not going to do anything about it." Clara's eyes softened with understanding. "That's the thing, Mia. We can't wait for someone to do something. The people who have the power, like Barry, they're not going to fix it. We have to fix it ourselves." Mia's mind raced. "You think we can change things here?" Clara smiled, but it wasn't a smile of reassurance. It was one of determination, of knowing how hard the road ahead would be. "I think we have to try. We can't just keep letting people get away with it. If no one else is going to speak up, then it's on us." That night, as the restaurant began to slow down, Mia found herself cleaning tables, her movements automatic, her mind elsewhere. As she wiped down the counter near the bar, she overheard a conversation between two regulars sitting at the bar. "I don't know what it is," one of the men was saying, slurring his words slightly. "But I just can't stand how they let her work here. You know. I mean, there are plenty of people who are much better at this job than her." The other man snorted, clearly amused. "Yeah. She's always acting like she's better than everyone else. I'm just waiting for the day she finally messes up and gets herself fired." Mia felt a heat rise in her chest, her hands trembling as she wiped the counter a little harder than necessary. The words were so casual, so cruel. They weren't even speaking about her to her face, but Mia could hear it in every word. The dismissal. The expectation that she should be grateful just to be here, just to serve them. Her breath quickened, but instead of letting the anger flood her system, Mia did something she had never done before. She turned around, looked at the men, and straightened her back. "Is there a problem, gentlemen?" she asked, her voice cold and controlled. The men paused, taken aback by her directness. The first man looked at her, a forced smile on his face. No. Just talking." Mia's gaze didn't waver. "Well, I'm here to work. If you have something to say about my performance, I suggest you speak directly to me. Otherwise, please don't waste my time." The silence that followed felt heavy. The men exchanged uneasy glances before the one who had spoken first muttered an apology. But Mia didn't wait for more. She turned back to her cleaning, her chest tight with the raw emotion of the moment. She hadn't just stood up for herself. She had taken control of the situation, taken power back from the invisible forces that tried to strip it away. Later that evening, as she sat in the employee lounge again, Clara joined her. "I saw what you did back there," Clara said, a grin spreading across her face. "You were awesome. You're not going to let them get away with it, huh?" Mia let out a breath, the tension easing out of her. "No, I'm done letting them get away with it. It's not just me anymore, Clara. I've got allies now." Clara's smile grew wider. "That's the spirit." Mia looked out the window again, the city lights twinkling in the distance. For the first time in a while, she felt a spark of something she hadn't felt before, hope. Maybe, just maybe, this place could change. The restaurant was quieter than usual when Mia entered for her shift the next evening. The late-night rush hadn't started yet, and the usual hum of the place felt hollow, as if it were holding its breath. Mia stepped into the back room, trying to shake off the weight of the day. She hadn't been able to stop thinking about the conversation with Clara, about the moments of support she had found in the midst of so much indifference. It wasn't just her anymore. There were others who felt the same, who had seen the same things, who were ready to stand up. But as she hung her apron in the back, a familiar knot formed in her stomach. The restaurant was still the same. The patrons hadn't changed. The systemic issues were still there, lurking beneath the surface, ready to pounce when no one was watching. When Mia stepped out onto the floor, she saw him again, the man. The one from table 3. The one who had told her she didn't belong here. He was sitting at the same table, laughing with his colleagues, his voice echoing across the room like a reminder. Mia took a breath, her hands tightening around the tray she was holding. He was one of those regulars, rich, entitled, the kind who could walk into a place like Maddox's and demand anything they wanted. Mia knew his type well. He thought the world owed him something. She hadn't been able to forget those words, the way he said them so casually, as if it were nothing. The way he made her feel small in front of everyone, as if her presence in that space, in his space, was some kind of mistake. But tonight, as Mia approached his table to take his order, the anger she had felt before started to simmer beneath the surface. He looked up at her as she reached the table, his eyes sweeping over her with that same dismissive gleam, the same arrogance that made Mia's skin crawl. "You again," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. Mia forced a smile, trying to keep her composure. "Yes, sir. What can I get you tonight?" He looked at her for a moment, as if sizing her up, and then nodded dismissively at the menu. "I'll have the steak medium rare. And make sure it's properly cooked this time." Her stomach tightened, but Mia bit back the retort that was burning in her chest. She nodded. "Of course, sir." As she turned to leave, he called after her, his voice louder this time, for all the other patrons to hear. "Make sure you don't mess it up, all right?" He smirked, like the power was in his hands, like he could ruin her if he wanted to. Mia felt the weight of his words, the humiliation creeping up her spine. She swallowed hard, her breath coming in sharp, controlled bursts. "Make sure you don't mess it up. That line had always been there, lurking behind every smile she forced, behind every plate she served. The way they treated her like she was less than human, less than a person. It wasn't just the blatant racism. It was the constant, quiet dehumanization that wore her down. She turned and walked to the kitchen, her heart pounding in her chest. This time she couldn't let it go. Clara noticed her tense posture as Mia walked past, and her friend caught her by the arm. "You okay?" Mia didn't answer immediately. She just stared at the order she had written down, her pen gripping the paper so tightly it bent the edges. Her vision blurred with a mix of frustration, anger, and something darker she couldn't quite name. "I'm not okay," she said, her voice low. "I'm done being treated like this." Clara didn't respond right away. She just stood there, giving Mia the space she needed. After a moment, she nodded, her eyes filled with understanding. "What are you going to do?" Mia took a breath, her grip loosening on the paper. "I don't know yet. But I'm not just going to let him walk all over me. Not this time." She took the order to the kitchen, trying to push down the mounting pressure inside her. As she stood by the counter, waiting for the steak to be prepared, she overheard a conversation between a couple of her coworkers in the corner. They were talking about the incident with the customer. Her customer. The man who had made the comment about her not belonging there. "I can't believe she's still working here after what he said," one of the servers said. "I mean, I would have walked out." "I wouldn't blame her if she did," another added. "I don't think I could handle the way they talked to her." Mia felt her chest tighten. It wasn't the first time she had heard comments like this, offhand remarks about her strength, her ability to just let it roll off her shoulders. But this time she couldn't ignore it. The betrayal of silence had always been louder than the words themselves. The steak came up, and Mia took it with shaking hands. She had to face him again. She had to walk right back into that moment, even though it felt like the weight of the world was bearing down on her. She couldn't back out. Not this time. When she arrived at his table, he was still laughing with his friends, oblivious to the storm building inside her. She set the plate down in front of him, the steak perfectly cooked, just as he had requested. "Here you go, sir," she said, her voice steady but taut. He barely looked up. "Finally," he muttered, barely making eye contact. "About time." Something snapped inside Mia. She couldn't stand it anymore. She clenched her jaw and held her ground, refusing to let him treat her like this any longer. "No, sir," she said, her voice sharper now, rising with the anger she had been holding back for so long. "You don't get to talk to me like that. You don't get to treat me like I'm beneath you." The table went silent. The man's friends looked at him, then back at Mia, unsure of how to respond. For a brief moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. The man finally looked up, his eyes narrowing. "What did you say?" he asked, his voice low. Mia stood tall, meeting his gaze without flinching. "I said you don't get to treat me like that. I'm here to do my job, and I'll do it to the best of my ability. But I will not be disrespected." The man's face twisted with anger, but Mia didn't back down. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about her, about every other black person who had been forced to endure the casual cruelty of those who thought they were above it all. "I don't need to take this," he sneered, standing up and shoving his chair back. "You'll regret this." Mia met his gaze, her voice quiet but firm. "Maybe you're the one who will regret it." He stood there for a moment, his face flushed with rage. But Mia didn't move, didn't flinch. And for the first time she felt a sense of power. Power that wasn't just about the job she did, but about who she was. The man turned and stormed out of the restaurant, his friends trailing behind him, muttering under their breath. Mia stood there for a moment longer, the tension in her shoulders slowly beginning to ease. The restaurant was silent, and Mia could feel the eyes of her coworkers on her. But she didn't care anymore. She had finally spoken up. Mia had never been one for conflict. She had always prided herself on keeping her head down, doing her job well, and maintaining the peace. But something about the incident with the man from Table 3 had shifted something deep inside her. The words he had thrown at her, those casual dismissive remarks, had been the last straw. It wasn't just one moment anymore. It was the culmination of years of subtle, and not so subtle racial biases that she had been expected to endure without complaint. After her confrontation with the man at his table, the tension in the restaurant had been palpable. The patrons whispered, and the staff exchanged uncomfortable glances. Mia had done what she swore she would never do. She had made a scene. And now, she had no idea what would happen next. The rest of her shift dragged on in a blur. Her mind kept replaying the words she had said to the man, over and over again. She had stood up for herself, but at what cost? What would the fallout be? Would Barry fire her? Would the other employees side with her? Or would they distance themselves, afraid of losing their jobs? When the night shift was over, and the last of the customers trickled out, Mia found herself standing alone in the employee lounge, staring at the clock on the wall. It was almost 11:30 p.m. She had expected Barry to pull her into his office at some point to discuss what had happened, but so far there had been nothing. The silence in the lounge felt suffocating. Mia wasn't sure if she was dreading the conversation with Barry or hoping it would never come at all. A part of her wanted to forget the whole thing, to pretend it hadn't happened, but the anger simmering inside her wouldn't let her. She wasn't going to let it go. Just as she reached for her phone to check the time, the door to the lounge swung open, and Barry stepped inside. His usual cool demeanor was gone. His face was tight, his jaw set in that familiar businesslike way. Mia knew what was coming. This was it, the confrontation she had been waiting for. "Mia," Barry began, his voice low. "We need to talk." She stood up, trying to steady her breathing. "About what?" "About what happened tonight," he said, his eyes not meeting hers. "I heard about the scene you caused at table 3. Mia felt a knot tighten in her stomach. It wasn't a surprise that Barry had heard about it. The entire restaurant had been buzzing about it, even if no one had said anything directly to her face. "I didn't cause a scene, Barry," Mia said, her voice steady despite the rising tension. "I stood up for myself. That man was out of line, and I wasn't going to let him talk to me like that." Barry's eyes flicked up to meet hers, but there was no sympathy in them. "You don't get it, do you, Mia?" His voice was quiet, but the edge was unmistakable. "This is a high-end restaurant. We cater to people with money, people with influence. You can't just start making a scene like that." Mia's heart hammered in her chest. "What are you saying? That I should just let him walk all over me? That I should stay silent like I always do?" Barry sighed, running a hand through his hair. "It's not about staying silent, Mia. It's about picking your battles. You're making things difficult for all of us. Do you really think I want to deal with the fallout from something like this? We can't afford to lose customers like him." Mia's mind raced. "So that's it. You're going to side with him because he's a regular, because he's a customer?" Barry didn't answer right away, and Mia could see the internal struggle in his eyes. She knew he wasn't a bad person, at least not by his own standards. He was just part of the system, a system that rewarded silence and punished those who dared to disrupt it. "It's not that simple, Mia," he said finally. "I have a business to run. You're a great employee, but you're making things complicated. I can't have my staff causing problems with the customers, no matter what's going on." Mia's fists clenched at her sides. "So, what do you want me to do? Apologize? Pretend like nothing happened?" Barry shook his head. "No, I don't want you to apologize. But I do want you to understand that this thing you're doing, it's not helping anyone. It's just making it harder for all of us." Mia stood there, her chest tight with frustration. She had known this was coming, but hearing it from Barry, the person she had once thought of as an ally, felt like a betrayal. She had expected him to stand by her, to acknowledge the truth of what had happened. But instead, he was just reinforcing the same tired narrative that kept people like her in their place. "I'm not going to stay silent anymore," Mia said, her voice cold and firm. "I've been silent for too long. And I'm done." Barry's eyes narrowed. You don't know what you're doing. You think you're standing up for yourself, but all you're doing is putting yourself in a bad position. If you keep this up, you'll end up getting yourself fired." Mia's breath hitched at his words. A part of her wanted to back down, wanted to give in to the fear that had always kept her in line. But another part of her, stronger now, more determined, refused to let that happen. She had come too far. She had made the decision to stop being a bystander in her own life. "I'm not afraid of losing my job," Mia said, her voice steady. "I'm not afraid of you or anyone else. What I'm afraid of is continuing to let this happen, day after day. The racism, the microaggressions, the silence. It's killing me, Barry. It's killing all of us." Barry stared at her for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then, with a slow exhale, he nodded. "I get it, Mia. But you need to think about the bigger picture. You can't just act on impulse. You have to think about what this will mean for you, and for everyone else." "I have thought about it," Mia said quietly. "And I'm not backing down." For a moment, there was nothing but silence between them. Then Barry, for the first time that night, looked at her with something resembling understanding in his eyes. But it wasn't enough to change what was already set in motion. "Do what you have to do," he said finally, his voice resigned. "But don't say I didn't warn you." Mia stood there for a moment longer, her heart still pounding. But as she turned and walked out of the lounge, she felt a weight lift off her shoulders. She had made her choice. Now all she had to do was live with it. Mia woke up to a feeling of exhaustion that clung to her like a second skin. The confrontation with Barry the night before had taken a toll on her, but she couldn't shake the sense of relief that had come with standing her ground. She had said her piece. She had made it clear that she wasn't going to remain silent anymore. But in the days that followed, it became increasingly clear that there were consequences for speaking out. As Mia prepared for her shift, the weight of what had happened the previous night still pressed down on her. Barry had warned her about the fallout, and though she had hoped for the best, a part of her feared he was right. But she refused to back down. She couldn't. Not after everything she had been through. When she arrived at Maddox's, the tension in the air was palpable. Her co-workers avoided her gaze, their faces a mixture of unease and discomfort. No one outright said anything, but the silence spoke volumes. The ripple effect of her confrontation had spread through the restaurant like wildfire. People had talked, and now Mia was a subject of whispered conversations and sidelong glances. She pulled on her apron and entered the kitchen, hoping for a moment of peace before the night's rush. But as soon as she stepped through the door, Clara approached her, her face tense. "You okay?" Clara asked, her voice low, almost hesitant. Mia nodded, forcing a smile. "Yeah, just tired. Same as always." Clara hesitated, then leaned in closer. "Mia, we need to talk. You're not the only one who's noticed the shift around here. People are talking about you, about the way you handled that customer. Some of the staff are worried and others." Clara trailed off, her eyes scanning the room. "Some are starting to distance themselves from you." Mia's stomach sank. She had expected this, but hearing it from Clara, the one person she had thought would be her ally, was like a punch to the gut. "What do you mean, distance themselves?" "They're afraid," Clara said quietly. "They're scared of what's going to happen if they side with you. People don't want to be caught in the middle. It's easier for them to pretend like nothing's wrong and keep their heads down. You've made it hard for them to do that." Mia stood there for a moment, the weight of Clara's words sinking in. She had known deep down that this was coming. When you challenge the system, when you confront the injustice that's been silently accepted for so long, there's always a price to pay. But hearing it so bluntly from someone she had trusted made it feel real in a way it hadn't before. "I don't care," Mia said, her voice more forceful than she intended. "I'm not going to back down. This isn't about me anymore. It's about all of us. If they can't handle the truth, that's their problem." Clara's eyes softened, but there was a trace of something Mia couldn't quite place. Regret, maybe, or fear. "Mia, I'm with you, okay? But you've got to understand that not everyone is as strong as you are. Some of these people, they're just trying to survive. They don't want to lose their jobs over something like this. Mia swallowed hard. I get it, Clara. But I'm not asking anyone to put their job on the line for me. I'm just asking for basic respect. Is that too much to ask? Clara opened her mouth to respond, but before she could, the door to the kitchen opened and Barry stepped in. The room fell silent, the staff immediately straightening at his presence. Mia could feel the tension in the air, thick with unspoken words. Barry's gaze swept across the kitchen, and for a moment, his eyes locked with Mia's. There was something cold in his expression, something that sent a chill down her spine. Mia, Barry said, his tone clipped. Can you step into my office for a moment? Mia's heart skipped a beat. She knew what this was about. She had been expecting it, but now that it was happening, the reality felt heavier than she had imagined. She nodded and followed Barry into the small office at the back of the restaurant. As soon as the door closed behind them, Barry wasted no time. You've caused a lot of problems, Mia, he said, his voice low but firm. The customers are talking. The staff is talking. This is getting out of hand. Mia stood there, her chest tight with the weight of his words. I don't care about the gossip, Barry. I care about doing what's right. And what that man said to me was wrong. Barry's expression hardened. I get that you're upset, but you have to understand, this isn't just about one customer. This is about the reputation of the restaurant. We can't afford to lose high-paying clients because one of our servers decided to make a scene. Mia felt her anger flare. I wasn't making a scene, Barry. I was standing up for myself. I've been quiet for too long, letting this stuff slide. But it's not just about me. There's a pattern here. And you know it. It's not just one customer. It's the way people like me are treated every single day. Barry's jaw tightened. That's not what this is about. You're not the only person working here. You can't just think about yourself. You're jeopardizing your position, Mia. For a moment, Mia thought he was going to say something else, but instead there was a long pause. Barry looked at her, his face hardening with a decision that had clearly been weighing on him for days. I'm sorry, Mia, he said finally. But I can't keep you here under these circumstances. I'm letting you go. Mia's heart dropped. The words were a punch to the gut, but they weren't entirely unexpected. She had known that this was a possibility, but hearing them spoken aloud still felt like a blow. She swallowed hard, her voice shaking slightly as she spoke. So that's it then. Barry nodded, his eyes flicking away from hers. I have to do what's best for the restaurant. Mia stood there for a moment, stunned, trying to process what had just happened. The anger she had been holding in flooded through her, but it wasn't enough to stop the tears from welling in her eyes. Fine, Mia said, her voice steady despite the storm inside her. I'll go. But don't think this is over. She turned and walked out of the office, the sound of her footsteps echoing in the silence of the hallway. She couldn't help but feel the weight of what had just happened, the betrayal of it, the injustice of it. But as she stepped into the kitchen, she realized something that surprised her. She wasn't alone. Clara was waiting for her by the back door, her face a mixture of concern and guilt. I'm sorry, Clara said quietly. I never wanted you to be put in this position. Mia looked at her, and for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to feel the depth of the moment. It's not your fault, she said softly. But this is just the beginning. The next morning, Mia woke up to the unmistakable weight of uncertainty pressing down on her. The news of her firing had already spread like wildfire, not just within Maddox's but throughout the city. People were talking, and Mia knew that the truth, her truth, would eventually come out. It wasn't just the fact that she had stood up to a racist customer. It was the fact that she had refused to be silent. And that, more than anything, was what had made her dangerous to the establishment. She sat at her kitchen table, sipping coffee, her phone vibrating with notifications. Her social media had been flooded with messages from people offering support, others criticizing her for making a scene. Her heart ached as she read some of the responses. It wasn't just the customer she had stood up to. It was the entire culture, the silence that had allowed it all to go on unchecked for so long. And now, the entire city seemed to be watching. Her phone buzzed again, this time with a message from Clara. Mia hesitated before opening it. She had already had a brief conversation with Clara earlier that morning, but the guilt in her friend's voice had been too much to bear. Mia understood, but the betrayal still stung. Clara. I'm so sorry, Mia. I know you were right and I should have backed you up. But I'm scared. People here are talking about what happened. I don't know how to fix it, but I want to help. I'm so sorry. Can we talk? Mia stared at the message for a long moment, her heart heavy with the weight of what had happened. She wanted to be angry at Clara, to call her out for not standing by her, but she knew it wasn't that simple. Everyone in that restaurant, including Clara, had been part of the same system, a system that forced people like Mia to keep their heads down if they wanted to survive. Mia took a deep breath, typing out her response. Mia. It's not your fault, Clara. You didn't create the system. But we can't pretend it doesn't exist. I'm done letting it control me. I'll talk to you later. I need to figure out what comes next. She put her phone down, the weight of everything sinking in. What came next? Mia had lost her job at Maddox's, but she hadn't lost her voice. The more she thought about it, the more determined she became. She had to make this count. This couldn't just be another story that would fade away after a few days. She needed to make people see the truth. She needed to expose everything she had experienced, everything the staff, the customers, and even the management had allowed to fester behind closed doors. The first step was obvious. She had to tell her story. Mia sat at her desk, opened her laptop, and began typing. She wasn't going to hide anymore. She was going to use the platform she had, her social media, her voice, to speak out. Slowly, her fingers moved across the keyboard, the words flowing faster than she expected. It wasn't just about what had happened at Maddox's. It was about everything. The microaggressions, the way people in power turned a blind eye, and the constant pressure to remain silent or risk losing everything. Her story was raw, honest, and vulnerable. She wrote about her experiences, the pain of being dismissed, and the emotional toll of constantly having to prove her worth in a world that never saw her as equal. She wrote about the customer who had crossed the line, but also about the countless others who had made her feel small in 1,000 different ways. She wrote about the moment she had decided to speak up, even though she knew the risks. She wanted people to understand. No one should have to choose between their dignity and their livelihood. When she finished, she reread the post, her heart pounding. She hesitated for a moment, thinking about the consequences. Backlash. The judgment. But then she remembered why she was doing this. She wasn't doing it for validation or attention. She was doing it for the people who had never had the courage to speak up. She was doing it for herself. With one last breath, she hit post. The response was immediate. Comments flooded in, some from people she knew, others from strangers. Some were supportive, expressing anger at the injustice she had faced. Others were critical, accusing her of making a mountain out of a molehill, or ruining her career for attention. But Mia didn't care about those comments. She had expected them. It was the positive ones that made her feel like she had done something important. But the real surprise came when a local news station reached out. They had seen her post and wanted to hear more about her story. Mia hesitated for a moment. This was the exposure she hadn't planned for, but she knew this was an opportunity to take her message further. This was her chance to expose the systemic racism that had festered at Maddox's and, by extension, in so many other workplaces. She agreed to the interview. The following day, Mia sat nervously in front of the camera, the bright lights casting harsh shadows on her face. The reporter, a woman named Sarah, smiled at her reassuringly. "Thank you for agreeing to speak with us, Mia," Sarah said. "We've heard your story, but we want to hear it from you. What happened at Maddox's, and why did you decide to speak out?" Mia took a deep breath, her hands shaking slightly as she adjusted her position. This was it. She wasn't just speaking for herself anymore. She was speaking for everyone who had been silenced, everyone who had been made to feel less than. I decided to speak out because I couldn't stay silent anymore, Mia began, her voice steady despite the nerves coursing through her. What happened to me at Maddox's isn't an isolated incident. Something that happens every day. I've been a part of a system that doesn't just allow racism, it perpetuates it. And I'm not the only one who's been treated this way. There are others, too, who are afraid to speak up because they fear losing their jobs, their livelihoods. But I'm done being afraid. As she spoke, Mia could feel the weight of the words, the truth of them settling deep in her chest. She wasn't just telling her story. She was exposing a truth that had been hidden for far too long. And as she looked into the camera, she knew that this was just the beginning. By the time the interview aired, Maddox's reputation had already begun to crack. Social media exploded with reactions, some supporting Mia, others attacking her, but there was one undeniable truth. People were paying attention. The restaurant's management scrambled to control the narrative, but it was too late. Mia's voice had broken through, and now there was no going back. Mia felt a sense of vindication as the story gained momentum, but there was still a lingering sadness inside her. She had lost her job, yes, but more than that, she had lost the illusion that things would get better on their own. She knew the battle was far from over. But for the first time, Mia felt like she had done something that mattered. She wasn't just fighting for her job anymore. She was fighting for change. The days following the interview were a blur for Mia. She had hoped that speaking out would bring some relief, but instead it had opened up a whole new world of consequences, ones that she hadn't fully prepared for. The response to her story had been overwhelmingly mixed. Supporters rallied behind her, flooding her social media with messages of solidarity, while critics accused her of trying to ruin Maddox's for a few bad apples. The local news stations picked up her story, and soon enough Mia's name was trending. The interview she had given, raw and unfiltered, struck a chord with many people. The truth she had spoken resonated far beyond the walls of the restaurant. People from all walks of life were reaching out to her, sharing their own experiences with racism, microaggressions, and the silent complicity of institutions that had allowed these things to thrive. But for every message of support, there were 2 or 3 condemning her actions. The usual back and forth of public opinion. She had expected it, but that didn't make it any easier to digest. Still, one thing had become clear. The spotlight was on Maddox's now. The restaurant could no longer pretend that everything was fine. The cracks were starting to show. The owner, Thomas Maddox, had been forced to address the situation publicly. He gave a statement that felt like a textbook example of corporate damage control. "We do not condone racism or discrimination of any kind at Maddox's," he said, with just enough conviction to make it sound rehearsed. "We are conducting a thorough investigation into the incident and will take appropriate actions." Mia rolled her eyes as she read the statement. A thorough investigation. It was a joke. She knew it was just a way for the restaurant to placate the public, a way to push the matter under the rug and maintain the status quo. There was no real desire to change anything. Mia had seen how they treated people like her, like their silence was just another part of the service. The real change, Mia realized, was not going to come from them. It had to come from people like her. People who refused to be silent, who were willing to speak out even when the consequences felt unbearable. On the 4th day after the interview, Mia received an unexpected call. It was from a local law firm specializing in civil rights cases. "Ms. Collins." The voice on the other end was calm but authoritative. "This is Lisa Roberts. I'm with Bennett, Shaw and Cummings. I'm reaching out because we've been following your story, and we believe you may have a case against Maddox's." Mia blinked, trying to process what she was hearing. "A case?" she asked, her voice small with disbelief. "For what?" "There are grounds for a potential lawsuit, Ms. Collins. Based on your story and the treatment you've described, there may be violations of your rights under both federal and state employment laws. The way you were fired, the way you were treated, those things could be legally actionable. We'd like to discuss the details with you further." Mia's heart raced. She had never thought about taking legal action, but hearing the possibility, hearing someone who actually believed in her side of the story, made the weight of everything feel a little lighter. For the first time in days, she felt a small flicker of hope. I didn't know this was something I could pursue, Mia said, still grappling with the idea. But I want to talk. I don't know what I'm doing, but if there's a way to hold them accountable, we'll guide you through it, Ms. Collins. You're not alone in this. Let's set up a time to meet. Mia agreed to meet with them the following week, her mind spinning with the possibilities. It wasn't just about compensation or revenge. It was about forcing Maddox's to face the truth. It was about making sure that no one else would have to endure what she had. As the days went on, Mia found herself being pulled in two directions. On one hand, she had her supporters, friends, strangers, even former co-workers, who urged her to keep pushing forward, to use the platform she had created to keep the conversation alive. On the other hand, there was the constant pressure to let it go, to move on, to find another job and put all of this behind her. But Mia couldn't shake the feeling that this was bigger than her. It wasn't just about a single incident. It wasn't just about Maddox's. This was about the systemic racism that had been allowed to fester in workplaces like it, in schools, in communities. The silence had been the most dangerous part. Now that it was broken, there was no going back. That weekend, Mia attended a rally organized by local activists, an event that had been planned long before her story had hit the news. But in the days following her interview, it had taken on new meaning. The rally wasn't just about fighting for justice. It was a symbol of solidarity for everyone who had been silenced. Mia walked through the crowd, her heart swelling as she saw so many familiar faces. People from her neighborhood, from her school, from her social media. Everyone there had come to support her. And it was then, in the middle of that sea of people, that Mia realized something profound. She was not alone. The battle wasn't just hers. It was everyone's. Later that day, as she stood on the makeshift stage, speaking into the microphone, Mia felt a calmness come over her. She had found her voice, and she was going to use it. Too many of us have been told to be silent, Mia said, her voice clear and strong. Too many of us have been taught to swallow our pain, to endure the cruelty of a system that doesn't care. But I'm here to tell you that we don't have to keep enduring. We don't have to keep waiting for someone else to fix this. We can do it together. The crowd erupted in applause, the sound vibrating through her chest, and Mia knew in that moment that there was no turning back. Whether or not Maddox's faced consequences for its actions didn't matter anymore. The movement had already begun. By the end of the week, Mia's story had reached national outlets. Maddox's had been forced to address the situation more directly, though it was clear that they were trying to minimize the damage. But Mia wasn't concerned with the restaurant anymore. She had her own path now, one that was carved by her actions, her words, and the solidarity of those who believed in her cause. As she sat down to meet with a lawyer the following week, Mia felt a sense of clarity. There was justice, but it was more than legal consequences. It was the knowledge that the silence had been broken, and the world was finally paying attention. Mia's phone buzzed in her pocket as she stepped out of the law office, the sunlight catching the edges of the building and throwing long shadows on the street. The city had a strange stillness to it this morning, a calm before the storm of what would follow. She glanced down at the message and smiled. It was Clara. Clara. I saw the interview. I saw the rally. You're amazing, Mia. I'm so proud of you. I'm sorry for not being there when you needed me. Can we talk soon? I miss you. Mia stood there for a moment, the weight of the past few weeks settling in her chest. So much had changed, and yet so much felt the same. Her life had turned upside down, but in many ways, it felt like she was finally standing on solid ground. She wasn't the same woman who had walked into Maddox's years ago, working in the shadows, trying to stay invisible. No, this Mia was stronger, more determined, and ready to confront everything that had kept her silent for so long. She tapped out a reply. Mia, I'll meet you at the park at 3. I think we have a lot to talk about. As she hit send, Mia's mind drifted back to the lawyer's office. The meeting had been eye-opening. The firm had laid out her options. They were prepared to go to court if necessary, But they also offered an alternative. A public settlement, where Maddox's would be forced to make changes, not just in their treatment of employees but in their policies about diversity and inclusion. They couldn't erase what had happened, but they could start addressing the systemic issues that allowed it to thrive. Mia had felt a weight lift from her shoulders when she agreed to move forward with the settlement. It wasn't about the money, though that would help cover her living expenses while she looked for another job. It was about accountability. She wanted Maddox's to know that their actions had consequences, that their culture of silence had been shattered. This was about making sure that no one else had to endure what she had. As Mia walked down the street toward the park to meet Clara, she saw her reflection in the windows of nearby shops, and for the first time, she didn't feel like an imposter. She didn't feel like the quiet waitress who was too afraid to speak up. She saw a woman who had found her voice, a woman who had reclaimed her power. At the park, the sun was high in the sky, casting long golden beams over the grass. The sound of children playing, the soft rustle of leaves in the breeze. It all seemed so peaceful, so ordinary. And yet, for Mia, everything had changed. She was no longer just a spectator in her own life. She was the one making things happen. She had done the unthinkable. She had spoken up, and the world had listened. When Clara saw her walking down the path, she stood up from the bench, her face lit with a mixture of relief and sadness. Mia didn't hesitate this time. She walked straight toward her, wrapping her arms around her friend in a tight hug. "I'm so sorry, Mia," Clara whispered into her ear. "I should have been there. I should have stood by you." Mia pulled back slightly, looking into Clara's eyes. There was pain there but also sincerity. "You're here now," Mia said softly. "That's all that matters." Clara nodded, wiping her eyes quickly. I didn't know how to handle it. The restaurant, it's all I've known. I was afraid of losing my place in it, you know? But you," Clara took a deep breath, "you showed me what it means to really stand up for yourself." Mia smiled, her heart swelling. "I couldn't have done it without you. You were the first one who understood what I was going through. But it wasn't just about me anymore. It was about all of us, Clara. Every single person who's been silenced, every person who's been made to feel like they don't belong." Clara's eyes filled with tears. "You're right. I see that now. And I'll do whatever I can to make sure no one else has to go through this." Mia nodded, feeling a sense of peace settle in her chest. This was the kind of change she had been fighting for, not just for herself but for everyone who had been oppressed and ignored. The battle wasn't over, not by a long shot, but it was already starting to shift. They sat on the bench together, the air warm and comfortable around them, as the world continued to turn. Mia could feel the tension in her muscles slowly ease, the relief of having one part of her journey come to an end and another just beginning. Over the next few weeks, the settlement with Maddox's was finalized. The restaurant agreed to create a new diversity and inclusion training program, overhauled its hiring practices, and promised to institute a formal process for reporting and addressing complaints of discrimination. While it wasn't perfect, Mia knew it was a step in the right direction. It was a tangible change, one that would force the restaurant to confront the very system that had allowed her to be silenced for so long. But the most important change, Mia realized, was the one within herself. She was no longer afraid to speak out, no longer afraid of what others might think. She had found the courage to face the uncomfortable truths, to challenge the people and systems that had perpetuated those truths. And that courage, she realized, was something that could never be taken away from her. As for Maddox's, the public backlash was swift and unforgiving. A number of customers who had once been loyal to the restaurant pulled their business, and a few of the restaurant's high-profile regulars even made public statements about their dissatisfaction with the management's handling of the situation. But Mia didn't feel any satisfaction in their downfall. It wasn't about them. It was about the people, the employees, the workers, who had been forced to endure the oppressive culture day after day. Mia found a new job a few weeks later at a small, local cafe that valued diversity and treated its employees with respect. The owner, a woman named Sophia, had heard Mia's story and offered her a position almost immediately. It wasn't as high-paying as her job at Maddox's had been, but it was a place where she could breathe, where her worth wasn't measured by how much she could serve but by who she was as a person. And as Mia worked her first shift at the cafe, serving coffee with a genuine smile, she realized that this new beginning was the one she had been waiting for all along.